Daniel Halley had always been a man carved out of oak, broad-shouldered, steady-handed, and unshackable in the face of drought, storms, or cattle stampedes. Folks in town used to say the sun rose over Halley Ranch because Daniel told it to. But ever since the night his wife, Clara, died giving birth to their first child, the house felt colder, dimmer, almost abandoned. Grief did strange things to a man who'd spent his whole life working the land. Daniel moved through his days in a fog, eating only when one of the ranch hands reminded him, sleeping only when exhaustion knocked him out. He carried his newborn daughter, Emma, with the carefulness of a man holding a piece of his broken heart, terrified she might slip through his fingers, the way her mother had slipped through life. The ranch, once lively with noise, now felt hollow. Clara had filled every corner with her warmth. Flowers and chipped pottery, music humming from the kitchen, the smell of fresh bread, soft laughter floating through the halls. Now the halls echoed. The piano gathered dust. Even the walls seemed to grieve. At first, neighbors and relatives came to help, offering casseroles and advice. But grief made Daniel stiff and distant, his eyes shadowed, his voice curt. He wasn't rude, just unreachable. Eventually, the visitors dwindled. The staff began quitting too, not out of cruelty, but because Daniel had become a ghost of himself. The housekeeper left first, murmuring that the place felt too heavy with sorrow. Then the nanny hired to help with Emma lasted only 3 days before saying she couldn't do work with a man who wouldn't to look her in the eye or speak more than 5 words. By the start of the 3rd month, only a handful of ranch hands remained and Martha, the cook. The ranch hands stayed because cattle needed feeding whether the master grieved or not. But Martha, she stayed for reasons she never said aloud. She had worked for the Hales long before Clara arrived, had watched the couple fall in love, marry under the peach tree, dance slow and sweet at the barn socials. Clara had treated her with gentleness, often stepping into the kitchen just to ask about her day or compliment her baking. When Martha cried after losing her own child the year before, it was Clara who held her. Now Clara was gone. And Martha, a large woman soft around the arms and middle, with gray just starting to streak her dark hair, moved quietly through the empty halls like a guardian spirit. She cooked meals Daniel forgot to eat, washed laundry he forgot to change, and stood by helplessly as he withered under the weight of guilt and loneliness. The baby cried constantly. Not a hungry cry, but an aching cry, one that mirrored Daniel's grief. Emma would fuss and twist in his arms, her tiny face red and scrunched until Daniel's shoulders slumped in defeat. He tried, Lord, he tried, but he didn't know how to soothe an infant. Clara had planned to teach him. But life, in its cruel timing, had stolen her before she could. Martha watched him from the kitchen doorway more than once, her heart squeezing. Daniel was a strong man, but grief had hollowed him out. His boots sounded too heavy on the floor. His eyes looked older. His hands trembled when Emma cried too long. Halley Ranch needed more than repairs or help. It needed someone to breathe life into it again. Someone patient, steady, warm. And though she didn't dare believe it yet, that someone would turn out to be Martha. Martha had always believed some people were meant to take up less space in the world, even if their bodies said otherwise. She wasn't small, far from it. Her hips were wide, her arms full, her footsteps heavy on the old ranch floors. But she moved with the timid carefulness of a woman trying not to be noticed. She had grown used to it, the sideways glances in town, the quiet jokes she pretended she didn't hear, the way men looked past her as if she were a piece of furniture. She had built her life around kitchens, around flour and fire and silence. That was the world where she felt safe, where she didn't have to apologize for taking up room. But her softness wasn't only physical. It lived in her tenderness, in the way she remembered everyone's favorite foods, in how she noticed when someone's shoulders slumped or when a ranch hand was having a hard day. She carried her kindness like a second apron, always worn, never flaunted. Yet beneath that softness lived a grief she never spoke of. A year before Clara's death, Martha had been pregnant. The news had filled her with a joy she kept mostly to herself. She was older, unmarried, and had long given up the hope of having a family. But life had surprised her, and for a little while she allowed herself dreams she hadn't dared entertain in decades. Then fate, cruel and sharp-edged, had taken the baby before it ever took a breath. Martha had returned to work only a week later because staying home with her grief felt like drowning. Clara had been the only one who knew. She'd hugged Martha tight, offering gentle comfort with the same warmth she gave everyone. "You don't have to carry this alone," she had said. But after Clara's death, Martha truly did carry it alone. That secret pain lived deep in her chest, pressing against her ribs every time she saw baby Emma. Sometimes she had to steady herself on the counter when the baby cried, the sound echoing the phantom ache of her own lost child. Still, she never once let her grief darken her care for the Halle family. Every morning, Martha rose before dawn, tying her apron with hands that still trembled sometimes. She cooked oatmeal barely touched, brewed coffee he let go cold, baked biscuits that sat untouched on the kitchen table. She didn't mind. Feeding the house made it feel alive again, even if no one else felt it yet. But she watched Daniel with a quiet, aching understanding. She saw the way his hands hesitated when he held Emma, the small panic in his eyes when the baby fussed. She noticed how he avoided the nursery because it smelled of Clara's perfume, how he stood too long at the doorways as if trying to remember the warmth that used to flow through them. And she noticed something else, something she kept secret even from herself. Her body still produced milk long after her own loss. The doctor had told her it would fade eventually, but grief had a way of anchoring itself in the body. She felt the occasional ache, the strange heaviness that reminded her she could have nursed her own child if life had been kinder. She never told a soul, not the doctor, not the ranch hands, not Daniel. It was her ghost to carry. But the ghost grew louder every time Emma cried in her father's arms. Martha would stand frozen in the kitchen doorway, tears burning at the corners of her eyes, not because she pitied the baby, but because she understood. Her body understood. Every instinct in her wanted to help, but what right did she have? She was just the cook, the fat woman in the apron, the one no one looked at twice. And yet, her secret, her grief, and her heart were about to become the salvation of the Halle family in ways she never imagined. The night it happened, the wind howled across Halle Ranch like a wounded animal. The shutters rattled, the old barn groaned, and the sky flashed with pale lightning that didn't bring rain-just tension. Inside the house, the storm had a second voice, the thin, desperate wail of baby Emma rising and falling like a siren. Martha heard it first, long before Daniel did. She was in the kitchen, cleaning the last of the supper dishes, her sleeves rolled up and her back sore from a long day. At first, she paused, listening. Sometimes babies fussed a little and settled on their own. But this cry was different. It wasn't hunger or discomfort, it was panic. It was exhaustion, it was pain. And it pierced straight through Martha's chest. She set the dish towel down, wiping her hands on her apron as she hurried down the hallway. Her footsteps were heavy, but her heart was faster. She didn't want to intrude, not when Daniel guarded his grief so fiercely, but the baby's cries were growing sharper, more frantic. At the nursery door, she stopped. Inside, Daniel stood with Emma in his arms, bouncing her in the awkward, desperate way of a man who is trying everything and understanding nothing. His hair was disheveled, his shirt half buttoned, his eyes red with exhaustion. The cradle sat untouched, rocking slightly from an earlier attempt to comfort the baby. "Come on, sweetheart," Daniel murmured, his voice cracking. "Please, just tell me what you need," Emma wailed harder. Martha's heart twisted. She knew that sound. It was the same kind of cry she had once pressed against her own breast, trying to soothe a life that had slipped away before it ever opened its eyes. She took a hesitant step into the room. "Sir?" Daniel didn't turn. He was too focused, too terrified. "I don't know what's wrong," he said, his voice ragged. "She won't take the bottle. She won't sleep. She's so warm. Do you think she's sick? Should I ride into town for the doctor?" "Should I?" His panic rose like the storm outside. Martha stepped closer. "She's hungry," she said softly. "But she won't." He jerked his head toward the bottle on the dresser. Milk dripped down the side, forgotten in the chaos. "She won't take it. She just screams." Martha swallowed. Her throat felt tight, like it was closing around her secret. "Sometimes," she whispered, "a baby needs more than a bottle." Daniel finally looked at her then. Truly looked. His brows knit together as he took in her trembling hands, her wide, worried eyes, the controlled breath she was struggling to keep steady. "Martha," he said slowly, "what are you telling me?" Her heart hammered against her ribs. She wanted to run. She wanted to vanish. This was not her place, not her child, not her world. She was the cook, the invisible woman in the background, the one who cleaned pots and baked biscuits and kept her grief quiet. But the baby's cries made her secret unbearable. "Sir," her voice cracked. I can help her." Daniel stared, confused, overwhelmed. Martha looked away, ashamed, her cheeks flushing with heat. "I lost my baby not long before Clara passed. My body, it didn't understand she was gone. Sometimes it still—" She touched her chest lightly, unable to finish. Understanding dawned in Daniel's eyes. She braced for rejection, for disgust, for judgment, for a cold, hard no. But before he could speak, Emma let out a high, desperate cry that made Martha's body react instinctively. She held out her arms. "Let me try," she whispered, voice trembling with fear and hope. "Please." For a long moment, Daniel hesitated. His grief, his pride, his confusion, they all warred in his expression. Then, slowly, he placed his daughter into Martha's waiting arms, and the entire house seemed to hold its breath. Emma's tiny body felt impossibly light in Martha's arms, yet the weight of what she was about to do made her knees tremble. She had held babies before, neighbors' children, Clara's cousins' little ones, but never like this. Never with her heart pounding so hard it felt like it might break through her chest. Never with so much at risk. The nursery lamp cast a dim amber glow over the room, softening the edges of everything. Daniel stood rigid, as if afraid to move and break whatever fragile moment this was. The storm outside rumbled deeply, shaking the window panes, but the sound paled in comparison to the storm inside Martha's chest. She settled into the rocking chair, shifting her weight awkwardly. It creaked under her, the old wood protesting, and heat rushed up her neck as she imagined what Daniel must be thinking, that she was too heavy, too awkward, too much. But Emma's sobs pulled her back. With trembling fingers, Martha adjusted her blouse, her breath shaky. She had never been so aware of her body before, not its softness, not its roundness, not its scars, until now, when every curve felt exposed despite the dim light. Shame curled in her stomach like a fist. She forced herself to look at Daniel. "Sir," the word felt too formal, too small for what she was about to say. But it was all she had. "I know this isn't proper. I know it's not what anyone would expect, but she needs comfort, warmth. A woman's body can give that." Daniel's expression softened, but he didn't move. He looked torn, confused, grateful, guilty, yet deeply afraid of doing the wrong thing. Martha swallowed hard. Her voice came out quieter this time, cracking at the edges. "No one wants a fat girl, sir. But I can nurse the baby." The confession felt like stepping off a cliff. Her words hung between them, trembling in the air. They weren't just about the baby. They were about her entire life, every rejection, every look of pity, every whispered comment, every man who never considered her as more than the help. She hadn't meant to say it out loud. It had slipped through her defenses like truth often did when the heart was raw. Daniel inhaled sharply, not in shock but in pain for her, not because of her. "Martha," he said softly, "I never." But Emma's cry cut him off, shrill and desperate, and Martha could no longer wait for permission that might never come. Instinct, ancient, maternal, primal, overrode everything. She guided the baby gently, whispering soothing sounds as she did. The moment Emma latched, the room shifted. The crying stopped almost instantly, replaced by the faint, rhythmic suckling of a newborn finally getting the comfort she needed. Emma's tiny fingers curled against Martha's skin. Her body relaxed completely, melting into the curves of the woman holding her. A soft gasp escaped Martha's lips, not of pain, but of overwhelming emotion. It felt like holding a piece of her lost child, like healing a wound she thought would never close, like breathing for the first time in months. Tears gathered in her eyes and spilled silently down her cheeks. She dared to look at Daniel. He wasn't shocked. He wasn't disgusted. He wasn't looking at her body with judgment or curiosity. He was looking at her heart. Daniel's eyes shone with gratitude so deep it made his voice shake. "Martha, thank you." The rocking chair creaked in a slow, steady rhythm as Martha held Emma close. She felt exposed, vulnerable, terrified, but also needed in a way she hadn't felt in years. Inside, something fragile and bright flickered to life. Not hope, not yet, but courage. For the first time, she felt she had a place in this house not as the cook, not as the background figure, but as the woman who had saved this child's peace and perhaps the widower's heart without even meaning to. For a long moment after Emma settled peacefully in Martha's arms, the nursery felt suspended like even time was afraid to intrude. The storm outside eased into a distant rumble, a soft echo compared to the quiet miracle unfolding inside the Hawley home. Martha rocked gently, her breath still uneven, her cheeks damp with tears she hadn't bothered to wipe away. She kept her eyes lowered, afraid to face Daniel again. Afraid of what he might think of her, of what assumptions he might hold, of what boundaries she feared she had crossed. Her heart hammered painfully in her chest. She had revealed too much tonight. Not just her ability to nurse her shame, her secret grief, her deepest insecurity. Words she had kept buried for years had slipped out uncontrollably. "No one wants a fat girl, sir." She mentally winced at the memory. She hadn't meant to say it. God, she wished she could take it back, swallow it whole, pretend she'd never allowed her vulnerability to spill into the open air. But Daniel had heard every syllable. And now she braced herself for his reaction, pity, embarrassment, maybe even discomfort. She expected him to turn away, to leave the room, to thank her stiffly, and then distance himself from her entirely. Instead, Daniel stepped closer. Not cautiously, not reluctantly, but with a kind of quiet, reverent purpose, as if he were approaching something fragile and precious. "Martha," he said, his voice low but steady, "look at me." She couldn't. Not yet. Her chin remained tucked to her chest, her gaze fixed on baby Emma's soft hair. Her arms tightened protectively around the child, not because she feared Daniel would take her away, but because holding Emma made Martha feel anchored, less exposed. Daniel knelt beside the rocking chair. The movement startled her enough that her eyes flicked upward just for a heartbeat. But what she saw there in his face, in his eyes, kept her attention locked. He wasn't looking at her with pity. He was looking with awe. "Martha," he repeated softly, "you saved her tonight." She opened her mouth to deflect it, to insist she had done nothing heroic, but he gently shook his head. "No," he said firmly, as if correcting a child. "You saved her." "And you saved me." Her breath caught. No one had ever said something like that to her, not with sincerity, not with emotion, not with gratitude so deep it trembled through his words. Daniel looked down at Emma, finally peaceful, her tiny body resting comfortably against Martha's generous warmth. He let out a long breath, as if only now letting himself relax after weeks of tension. "I didn't know what to do," he whispered. "I felt helpless, useless." His voice cracked slightly. "And then you stepped in." Without hesitation. Without thinking of yourself. Martha's throat tightened painfully. "It was instinct," she said softly. "Anyone would have done the same if they could." Daniel's gaze met hers again, steady, unblinking. "No, not anyone. You." A hot tear slid down her cheek. She had never been singled out like that. Not as special, not as essential, not as someone worth recognizing. She swallowed, voice barely a whisper. "I'm sorry, sir. If I overstepped. If this makes things complicated." Daniel reached out slowly, respectfully, and placed a hand over hers where it rested on Emma's back. His touch was warm, grounding. "You didn't overstep," he said. "You cared." "That's not a crime." Her eyes widened. Her breath caught again. "And Martha." Daniel's voice deepened, soft but unwavering. "You're wrong about what you said earlier." She blinked at him. "Wrong?" He nodded, his thumb brushing gently across her knuckles in a gesture so natural it shocked them both. "No one wants a fat girl?" he said quietly. "That's not true. Not tonight. Not here." She stared at him, stunned. He drew in a breath, the words leaving his lips with a weight that made her heart stumble. "You're the strongest person in this house," he said. "And I need you here." Her voice trembled. "You want me to stay?" He met her eyes. "Then stay." The words wrapped around her like a blanket, warm, unexpected, and life-changing. She didn't trust herself to speak. She simply nodded, holding Emma close as something inside her, something long dormant, began to bloom. The morning after that long, stormy night, Holly Ranch felt different. It was subtle like the first warm breeze of spring after a harsh winter, but unmistakable. The halls didn't echo as sharply, the silence didn't feel so suffocating, and Daniel Holly didn't move like a man carrying a mountain on his shoulders. Something in the house had softened. Martha felt it the moment she stepped into the kitchen. Emma had slept through most of the night in her crib after feeding peacefully at Martha V's breast. It was the first time in weeks the child had rested so soundly. Martha had stayed up for a while just listening to the quiet, unsure if she was allowed to feel the peace that had settled over her heart. When she entered the kitchen at dawn, ready to start breakfast as always, Daniel was already there. That alone was unusual. Daniel rarely rose before the sun anymore. Since Clara's death, he'd been sleeping in fragments, wandering the house at odd hours with a restless sorrow that never fully let him rest. But there he was, standing by the table with two mugs in front of him, one for himself and one he had clearly set out for her. He straightened when he saw her, a bit awkwardly, as if he wasn't sure what to say after the intimacy of the night before. "Mornin', Martha," he murmured. The sound of her name in his tired, gentle voice made her breath hitch. She'd heard him say it 1,000 times, but something was different now, softer, warmer. "Good morning, sir," she said quietly, her hands twisting in her apron out of habit. He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit with me?" "Just for a moment." Martha froze. Sit? With him? As an equal? It felt improper, almost rebellious. But something in his expression, hopeful, weary, sincere, made it impossible to refuse. She sat down slowly, awkwardly aware of her size, her clothes, the way the chair groaned beneath her. Daniel didn't seem to notice. Or if he did, he didn't care. He pushed the mug toward her. I made coffee." A small smile tugged his mouth. "It's not as good as yours." She took the mug carefully, trying not to tremble. "Thank you, sir." He shook his head. "Daniel," he corrected softly. Just Daniel. Her heart lurched. She nodded, though the word felt too intimate to say aloud just yet. They sat in silence for a while, sipping the steaming coffee. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, not like before. Instead, it felt like the house encouraging them, urging them to breathe after months of suffocating grief. Finally, Daniel spoke. "I don't know how to thank you for last night." "You don't have to," Martha said quickly, eyes lowering. "I only did what needed doing." He tilted his head. "You always do. You always step in before anyone else even realizes what's wrong." She blushed. No one ever praised her like that. Daniel continued quietly. "I couldn't have gotten through these last months without you." "I mean that." Her throat tightened. "I only wish," she hesitated, scared to say it. "I only wish I could have done more." Daniel reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. The contact was brief but powerful, sending a shiver through her. "You did more than anyone," he said. "More than I deserved." Martha swallowed hard. "You deserve kindness, sir." "Everyone does." He smiled, really smiled for the first time in months. It lit his face in a way that made Martha look down quickly, cheeks burning. She didn't want him to see the way her heart fluttered in her chest. "Emma's calm today," he added. "She's never been this peaceful." Martha nodded. She knows she's safe." "Babies feel that." His eyes softened even more. "Because of you?" Those words made something inside her shift, something gentle and fragile, something she didn't dare name. After breakfast, Daniel didn't retreat into his grief like he usually did. He lingered in the kitchen while she cooked, occasionally helping, occasionally just watching her with an expression she didn't know how to read. Respect? Gratitude? Or something deeper? She didn't let herself dream. Not yet. But a bond had formed, subtle, quiet, tender, and for the first time since Clara's passing, Holly Ranch felt warm again. The change in Holly Ranch did not stay quiet for long. At first, only the ranch hands noticed. They were rough men, used to long days, dust storms, and cattle that didn't behave, but they weren't blind. They saw Daniel walking with a straighter spine, speaking with more steadiness. They saw Emma's calmness, her soft coos instead of nightly screams. And most of all, they saw Martha moving through the house with something almost like light in her step. The men respected Martha. She fed them well, patched their shirts without being asked, slipped them second servings when she thought they looked tired. But even respect didn't stop curiosity. One morning as the hands gathered near the barn, tending to the tack, the whispers began. "Baby's been sleeping real peaceful lately," one said. "Yep. Funny how that started around the same time Martha's been looking tired, but content," another chuckled. A third man raised an eyebrow. "Think the boss knows she's been caring for the little one more than usual?" "Boss ain't stupid," someone murmured. "He knows. Question is how he feels about it." The group fell silent at that. Daniel Holly wasn't a man to gossip about. He was fair, honest, and carried grief like armor, but he was also unpredictable these days. Still, whispers tend to travel faster than horses. By the end of the week, the nearby town had picked up the scent of a story. When the ranch hand stopped by the general store for supplies, Mrs. Crowley, the owner's wife known for her sharp tongue, leaned over the counter and asked with a sly smile, "So is it true the widower is letting the cook play mama to the babe?" The hands stiffened. Some glared. One muttered, "Ain't your business." But that was the trouble with towns like theirs. Everything became someone's business eventually. Back at the ranch, Martha began to feel the shift. She wasn't told anything directly. Men weren't cruel enough to say the words to her face, but she caught the looks. The lingering glances from ranch hands who seemed unsure whether to treat her the same. The sudden silence when she walked into a room. The awkward apologies murmured if she came too close to their conversation. And worst of all, the sinking feeling that she was becoming a burden. One afternoon, as she kneaded dough with more force than necessary, she overheard two ranch hands whispering on the back porch. Their voices drifted through the open window, carried by the breeze. Daniel letting her get too close. Folks in town got opinions. Don't look right. A man of his status and, well, her. Poor Clara barely cold in the ground. Martha froze, hands buried in dough, heart thudding painfully. Her. Always her. Too big, too plain, too different. Not the kind of woman people expected Daniel Hawley to lean on. Not the kind of woman small-town tongues ever let rest. She pulled her hands free from the dough, wiping them on her apron even though the flour smeared worse. Her breath shook. Her throat tightened. Shame bloomed deep in her chest like a bruise. She knew their words held truth. She wasn't Clara. She never could be. And though Daniel had said tender things, kind things, things that warmed her heart, that didn't change how the world saw her. By evening, Martha's thoughts had spiraled into a quiet panic. She moved through her chores slower, distracted. When Daniel came to the kitchen holding Emma, saying he thought the baby missed her, Martha forced a smile but kept her distance. "Sir, I think," her voice faltered, "I think maybe I should step back a bit. Folks might misunderstand." Daniel frowned, confused. Misunderstand what? But Martha only shook her head, blinking back tears she refused to let fall. She wouldn't let her presence hurt him. She wouldn't let town gossip stain his name. She wouldn't let people whisper that she had inserted herself into a grieving widower's life. If leaving meant protecting him, then maybe she should go. She didn't say the words aloud yet, but the seed was planted. The bond forming so beautifully in Daniel's home was now threatened by the world outside and by Martha's fear that she had no right to belong there. The next morning, the ranch felt unsettled. The sky was clear, the horses calm, the routine unchanged, but something inside the house was not. Daniel sensed it the moment he stepped into the kitchen and saw Martha moving quietly, her posture tight and her smile forced. She barely looked at him. Usually, she greeted him with a warm nod, maybe a soft comment about breakfast or the weather. But this morning, she was a shadow of herself, eyes lowered, voice small, hands trembling as she ladled porridge into bowls. Emma fussed slightly in his arms, but even the baby's soft cries didn't make Martha look up the way she usually did. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. "Martha?" Daniel said, stepping closer. "Are you feeling unwell?" "No, sir," she whispered automatically, but he knew that was a lie. Her voice was tight, her shoulders hunched as if she were trying to fold herself smaller, trying to take up less space, trying not to bother anyone. It was the posture of a woman bracing for pain. Daniel gently placed Emma in her cradle, then turned back, watching Martha's trembling hands as she tied her apron too quickly. "Martha," he said again, softer now, "look at me." She hesitated, then slowly lifted her eyes. And in that single glance, Daniel saw grief, shame, and fear swirling together, fear for him, not for herself. He felt something hot and protective flare inside his chest. "What happened?" he asked quietly. Martha shook her head and tried to step past him. "It's nothing. Just foolishness on my part." He blocked her path gently, not forcefully. "Tell me." Her resolve crumbled. Tears filled her eyes and her voice cracked as she whispered, "People are talking, sir. The hands. The town. Folks think I'm—" she choked back a sob. "They think I'm trying to replace Clara, or that I'm taking advantage of your grief. That I'm too close." Daniel's jaw tightened. He had expected gossip, but not the cruelty pointed at the kindest woman he knew. "I can't let them say such things about you," Martha continued, wiping her cheeks. "This ranch is your reputation, your future. You and Emma deserve peace, not whispers because of me." "You think you're the cause of trouble?" Daniel asked, voice low. Martha nodded, swallowing hard. "I think maybe it's best if I leave. The room fell silent. Daniel stared at her, stunned. Then anger surged through him, not at her, but at every voice that had made her feel small, unworthy, unwanted. He stepped forward, emotion tightening his throat. "No," he said firmly. "You're not leaving." Martha flinched. "Sir, please." "Don't call me sir, right now," he said, his voice deep with emotion. "Not when you're hurting." She stared at him, trembling. Daniel drew in a breath, every word deliberate and grounded. "Martha, you have done more for this ranch than anyone. More for Emma than I ever dreamed someone could, and more for me." He paused, searching for the right words. "More than I deserved." Tears welled again in Martha's eyes. He continued, voice steady. "Let them talk. Let them whisper. It doesn't matter. They don't live here. They don't know what you've done, what you've given. I don't want them to ruin your name," Martha whispered. Daniel stepped even closer. "The only thing that would ruin me is losing you." Her breath caught. He wasn't done. "In these months, you've been the backbone of this home. You're the reason Emma is safe. You're the reason I can breathe without drowning." His voice thickened. "You're the only warmth in this house since Clara died." Martha covered her mouth with her hand, stunned. Daniel reached out slowly, carefully, and touched her arm. "I don't care about the town, or their gossip, or their expectations. I care that you stay." She met his eyes, wide and wet. "You truly want me here?" Daniel nodded, every inch of him sincere. "I want you here more than I've wanted anything in a long time." A sob escaped her, not of pain this time, but relief. And in that moment, the whispers outside didn't matter. The ranch hand's gossip didn't matter. The town's judgment didn't matter. What mattered was this silent vow Daniel made, that he would stand between her and every cruel word. That he saw her. That he chose her. That he needed her. Not as the cook, not as the help, but as the heart of his home. The night the storm returned, it was worse than the first winds, like knives. Rain hammering the roof, thunder rolling through the hills with a ferocity that rattled every window pane. Holly Ranch, already a place of quiet grief and long days, seemed to hold its breath under the rage of the tempest. Martha had stayed late in the kitchen, finishing a batch of bread she hadn't even meant to bake. Emma, safe in her crib, had already been fed and soothed, but Martha's mind was restless. She could hear the storm's roar in the walls, in the floors, in her own chest. It matched the turmoil she felt, the fear of her place in this household, the worry over the town's whispers, and the fragile bond growing between her and Daniel. Daniel knocked gently on the kitchen door before stepping inside. His hair was damp, his sleeves rolled up, and his boots dripped water onto the floor. The storm had caught him while he was checking the barn. His eyes, though weary, shone with something Martha hadn't seen before. Urgency. "Martha," he said, voice low but intense. "We need to talk." She turned to him, apprehension tightening her chest. "Sir?" He stepped closer, removing his coat, shaking off the rain, and ignoring the chill that bit at his skin. "I need to say what I've been holding back. I won't let this go any longer." Martha's heart skipped a beat. She had felt it coming, this weight between them, a tension that had been building for weeks, but now, with the storm raging around them, it was inevitable. Daniel took a deep breath, looking not at her body, not at her size, not at the flaws she had spent years cataloging in her mind, but at her eyes, warm, tired, and brave. "Martha, I've come to care for you, more than I expected, more than I should have. And I love you." Martha froze, her hands still covered in flour, a lump forming in her throat. The words were simple, direct, but carried a force that swept through her like the wind outside. Every fear, every doubt, every insecurity she had about herself, the whispers, the shame, the sense that she wasn't worthy fell away under the weight of his confession. I don't," she began, voice trembling. "I never thought. I never dared. She? Daniel interrupted gently, closing the distance between them. Don't speak. I see you, Martha. I see all of you. Every curve, every kindness, every bit of strength you hide. And I need you in my life, not as the cook, not as someone who helps me. I need you, you. Tears burned her eyes, and she blinked rapidly, unable to form words. She had never been seen like this, never been valued like this, and yet here he was vulnerable himself, showing her the same courage she had shown Emma during the first night she nursed the baby. I'm scared, she whispered finally, of losing you, of not being enough, of what people will say. Daniel cupped her face in his hands, rough from work, warm from the fire in his chest. Martha, we're not living for them. We're living for us, and I love you. Every part of you. And I don't want to imagine this house, this life, without you in it. The storm outside seemed to soften as if acknowledging the moment. The lightning flickered, illuminating their faces, and in the hush between thunderclaps, they simply stared at each other, two hearts raw and open, finally aligned. Martha felt her defenses crumble completely. She reached up, touching his cheek, tracing the line of his jaw, and in that instant, the years of shame, sorrow, and fear fell away. The bond they had nurtured through sleepless nights, whispered confessions, and quiet understanding had blossomed into something undeniable. I love you too, she whispered, barely audible, but loud enough to echo in the storm's retreating fury. Daniel smiled a smile full of relief, longing, and reverence, and pulled her close. For the first time since Clara's death, the house felt alive. The storm had passed, but something far greater had arrived. Love, fierce and steady, a bond forged through grief, courage, and truth. That night, Holly Ranch was no longer just a house. It was a home, a safe haven, a place where two broken hearts began to heal together. Morning broke gently over Holly Ranch, the sun spilling golden light across fields still wet from the previous night's storm. For the first time in months, the house seemed alive, vibrant, and welcoming. Emma's soft coos floated through the halls, mingling with the aroma of fresh bread Martha had baked and the gentle hum of Daniel moving about the kitchen. Martha stood at the counter, rolling out dough with practiced hands. Though her mind was full of a new kind of warmth, a quiet happiness she had never allowed herself to imagine. Daniel entered, carrying a small basket of eggs from the coop, his eyes bright, his shoulders squared. There was no trace of the haunted grief that had weighed him down for so long. Good morning, she said, her voice soft, tentative, but brimming with unspoken joy. Morning, he replied, setting the eggs down beside her. He paused, then added, with a smile that made her heart flutter, I hope you slept well. I did, she admitted, glancing toward Emma's nursery. The baby was cooing softly, turning in her crib, safe and peaceful. She did too. Daniel's smile deepened. He moved closer, brushing a stray strand of flour-dusted hair from her face. Thanks to you, he murmured. Both of you. Martha felt her cheeks warm. I just did what I could. More than anyone could, Daniel insisted, his hand lingering near hers. His touch was gentle, respectful, yet filled with intent, a promise of closeness, of partnership. Martha, I want you to know. You are part of this family. Not just Emma's, not just mine. Ours. The word struck her, simple but monumental. Ours, she repeated softly. She had spent years believing she didn't belong anywhere. Too big, too plain, too ordinary to be wanted. But Daniel's words, his unwavering gaze, told her otherwise. She was wanted, needed, loved. Later that morning, Martha moved to the nursery with a basket of freshly laundered clothes. Daniel followed, holding Emma carefully in his arms. The baby's tiny fingers curled around Daniel's thumb, a silent acknowledgement of the bond forming between them all. Daniel watched Martha dress the baby, a quiet awe in his eyes. "You've given her so much," he said softly. "So much comfort, so much love. You've given me hope again." Martha paused, brushing a curl from Emma's forehead. She looked up at Daniel, seeing in his expression a vulnerability and devotion she had never allowed herself to hope for. "We've given each other hope," she whispered. He nodded. Together. Outside, the ranch began to bustle with life once more. Horses neighed in the pastures, the wind carried the scent of wet earth and grass, and even the distant town seemed to feel the shift. Word of the night's storm and the peaceful household had traveled quickly, but this time the whispers mattered less. Martha realized that it wasn't about the town or the ranch hands. It was about the family they were building inside these walls. Over the following weeks, the bond between Daniel, Martha, and Emma deepened. They shared meals, laughter, and quiet moments by the fire. Daniel sought Martha's counsel on matters of the ranch, recognizing her wisdom, patience, and unwavering dedication. Martha, in turn, found confidence in her role not just as caretaker, but as an equal partner in this new life. The townspeople slowly came to see what Daniel had seen from the beginning. Martha wasn't just the cook. She was the heart of the household, the soul of the home, and the steady hand guiding both father and child through grief and toward happiness. One evening, as the sun set in a fiery blaze over the ranch, Daniel and Martha sat on the porch, Emma asleep between them. Daniel took Martha's hand in his, holding it as though it were the most precious thing in the world. "You stayed," he said softly, "and I am grateful every day." Martha leaned her head on his shoulder. "And I stayed because I belong here, with you, with Emma, with this family we've built together." The wind whispered through the trees, the ranch exhaled a peaceful sigh, and in that moment, all the sorrow and uncertainty of the past months seemed to dissolve. Holly Ranch was no longer just a place of work, grief, or obligation. It was home. It was love. And it was a family reborn stronger, kinder, and forever intertwined, bound by trust, courage, and the quiet, steadfast devotion of two hearts that had found one another amid the storms of life.